Welcome to the Fairest podcast. Here we explore spiritual insights and practical strategies to help you cultivate a family life rooted in beautiful, self-giving love. Join us as we invite experts to share uplifting perspectives and actionable advice for navigating the joys and challenges of modern family dynamics. Welcome back to the Fairest podcast. Today on our show, I'm joined by Dr. Johann D'Souza, a licensed therapist and the founder of Values First Therapy. In our conversation, we'll be discussing how anxiety and stress can impact marriage and how we can use communication and understanding to better support our spouses in seasons of struggle. So, Dr. D'Souza, thank you so much for being on the Fairest podcast.
Yeah, no worries. Happy to be here.
So we'd love to start to kind of get to know you first a little bit before we dive into our questions. So can you share with us a little bit about your background and kind of how you came to find Values First Therapy?
Sure. So I'm a clinical psychologist. That's a PhD level degree in the US. And my specialty is helping high performers overcome anxiety and distraction. The route I went here, though, is always respecting traditional family values. I try to combine modern psychology with traditional family values, hence Values First Therapy. Those values are dignity of human life, created male and female, and the beauty of chaste love. So that's for people with traditional family values who don't know where to turn, don't know if their therapist is woke or is going to mislead them. I just advertise that on my website so they know.
That's great. And I'm sure people really value that, no pun intended, because I'm sure it's hard to find, therapists who, support the same things that they believe in. That's awesome. So let's start off our conversation with you talked about anxiety and how that's kind of the foundation of what you do. How does anxiety often show up in our marriages? And because sometimes you can think, well, if I love my spouse, I won't ever come across that. I won't have anxiety with my spouse or with circumstances involved in that. So how does that show up in our marriages?
Two ways to look at it. One is, what is the predominant fear or deepest core fear of a husband? Probably be something along the lines of fear of looking incompetent. And then on the other side with the wife, it's fear of being abandoned. These things can lead to avoidance. For example, if a man is fear of being incompetent, he's going to maybe avoid talking about things that would make him look bad professionally, or talk about his professional struggles. He's going to want to just portray a picture of everything going well, which that may just lead to further stress and hiding important information that would actually make his life easier and help his wife to help him overcome that. Or on the other hand, with the wife, she may be turned to a lot of reassurance seeking. If there's a fear of being abandoned, and asking over and over again, when are you coming home? Who are you spending your time with? Just trying to double check, triple check that her husband is completely committed. But then this leads to the unintended consequence of pushing him farther away, because he may be completely committed and he's wondering, why is my wife asking all these questions? So that could be one core manifestation of fear.
Okay. And how can that, so you did mention a couple of examples of what those fears could look like in both men and women. How can, let's say, you said if a woman, keeps pushing or whatever about her husband, where are you, where are all those things, how can that quietly erode this kind of relationship that they've had, and cause more anxiety even in the midst of that?
Well, I think men often experience that as just being annoying over time. And so there's going to be two responses. One is just tuning the wife out. This is probably pretty common among good men. And it's just a way of protecting themselves from this constant barrage of henpecking. It's not the best long-term solution. It's like putting a protective building, like how an oyster builds this protective shell, the pearl over them. So it leads to a lack of communication over time. And then when the wife actually does have something meaningful to say, it's the signal that gets drowned out in all the noise. So that doesn't get addressed appropriately. But so that's one response, is just kind of ignoring, basically. Then the other response could be anger. Now, what happens with the anger response is the wife could react with just more pushback, like, "Oh, now I don't feel understood. You're not hearing me." Or the wife could then just react with sadness and retract more in her shell. And then on the surface level, it seems like the problem is solved because she's not talking anymore. But there can be some resentment that grows over time.
And yes, these are all really strong examples of kind of how this anxiety can sometimes start and then continue on and to grow and fester. Can you just to kind of go back to basics, I guess, can you give us a good like a strong definition that we can continue to refer to about anxiety and what that looks like just as a general?
I just look at it as a high level of fear. Honestly, the definitions of anxiety in the literature are not that good, I think.
Okay. Yeah.
So, fear is one of the basic emotions described by Aquinas, picking up from Aristotle. So, I think anxiety is just a high level of fear. If you look at fear as having three levels, like the lowest level is fear, the middle would be anxiety, and the highest is panic.
Okay. Okay. That's great. So once we have these our couples experiencing this kind of rise in fear, which then turns into that anxiety, how can husbands and wives look to each other with the love that they committed in their marriage to learn how to love each other sacrificially, even in the midst of this high anxiety?
Tell me if I'm off base here, but
Sure,
I
go ahead.
think the common um, the common opinion is that anxiety is an obstacle to love. That's well, I would be able to sacrifice for my spouse, but I'm just feeling so anxious and overwhelmed right now. So once that goes away, once I can address that, then I'll really be able to love my spouse. And so I think the most fundamental point I'd like to make today is that anxiety, in fact, has nothing to do with being able to love one spouse. That loving one spouse is a choice. And the essence of freedom is being able to choose the good regardless of what we're feeling. And in fact, our greatest ability to grow in love is manifested when we are experiencing challenges such as anxiety. If you ask yourself, who is a historic figure is very well respected, or who's someone who you think of that's really exceeded in love? If we think of our Lord Jesus Christ, the supreme act of love that's think of is his sacrifice on the cross, and that was not done in an absence of anxiety,
Mm,
as the agony in the garden
mm,
shows us.
mm.
I guess we talked about fear, anxiety, panic, maybe agony would be like the highest level. Um, so, in fact, the reason we recognize the greatness of his love is because we see that he was feeling anxious, among other things, and yet he chose to do the good despite that. So, in fact, I would encourage spouses to see the experience of being anxious as irrelevant to their day-to-day choices on the one hand, and on the other hand, as the perfect grounds to grow in their highest ideals, and the highest of which is love. Does that
That's
sound
great.
too simplistic?
No,
I
that's
don't want to I don't want to kind of like minimize people's suffering, which can be a danger when when I'm talking in a theoretical way.
Mhm. No, I think that's a great point because, you know, you hear that anxiety can be crippling, and I do think that some people struggle for sure with that. But I love that you're saying that you know it's love itself is its own choice, right? And so, how would you suggest, let's say, a couple to go about if they have the mentality that, you know, I'm struggling with anxiety over a certain situation or even just in general, like a constant struggle with anxiety, how can would you suggest, you know, the couple to continue to share in maybe the struggle, but then also to show like I'm actually choosing you, I'm loving you even through this other part that I'm dealing with.
Funny thing about anxiety, is extremely common, and as you said, can be crippling. The treatments for it are very well known and are very effective, and can be accomplished in a very short time. That's why I love treating anxious women personally, because it really affects their lives, and they turn around so quickly with just helping them understand what anxiety is, and then practicing the strategies to overcome it. And it's so liberating to see how they're able then to be fully present with their husband and with their children, look happier, and they're going to be healthier. So I would encourage people not to see the experience of anxiety as like a lifelong struggle that they'll never get over, but look for actually the scientifically based strategies that are very simple and will help them get through this and bring out their best selves.
Do you have any, you want to give us some tips into those strategies for women and or for men
Sure,
that, let's say, husbands and wives can practice with each other?
sure. There, so I can do that. It's a little bit artificial to do this in the abstract. The
Yeah.
best thing to do is catch someone in the moment of anxiety and then walk them through it. That's what I love doing. And in fact, part of the treatment is to evoke those feelings of anxiety in the session so that we can do real time walkthrough of how do you process it. And that's a very powerful experience when people realize I can have a 8 out of 10 level of anxiety 1 minute, and then the next minute I feel at peace, and because they know how to handle it. But nonetheless, with the
Yeah.
circumstances we have, will just give you the theoretical explanation.
Sure.
So, so my favorite skill when it comes to anxiety is mindfulness. So mindfulness is being in the present moment, being aware of what one is experiencing. Typically what happens with anxiety is people get stuck in their thoughts into this worry cycle, like a record playing, and they're not focused on the present. It's like being in a trance, in fact,
Mhm.
a negative trance. So there's a three-step mindfulness process when it comes to processing anxiety. The first step is simply rate your anxiety from 0 to 10. Rate the anxiety from 0 to 10. 10 is the highest. So that automatically wakes people up to their present moment experience rather than being trapped in the worry cycle or in the physical feeling of panic. It kind of objectifies the anxiety and in that way separates the person from the anxiety. It's called diffusion. Rather than the person feeling like them and their anxiety is one thing that they're stuck to, they're used to, they're able to separate from it and look at it from an outsider perspective. That happens just by rating the anxiety from 0 to 10. The second step is then physicalizing the anxiety, locating the anxiety in the person's body, preferably in the torso area, anywhere as high as the throat or as low as the stomach, but usually preferably in the chest area. It could be right in the middle of the solar plexus, or it could be over the heart. Those are the most common areas. So we locate it in the body as an anchor. So this is further kind of defusing from the experience and seeing it as something separate from one's true self. But it's also a way of experiencing the feeling as a feeling in the present moment rather than suppressing, avoiding, or distracting oneself from it, which are the predominant reactions for people who are suffering from anxiety disorders. So they locate the center of the anxiety. You identify what is the size of that feeling? What is the shape of it? Maybe it feels like a spike. But what is it made out of? Maybe it feels like a metal spike pointing inside the chest. Maybe it feels like a softball that's made out of concrete. How hot is it? Usually it's hot. Some people can't notice the temperature, but usually it's on the hotter side. Sadness tends to be on the cooler side. Does it have any movement? Does it have any color to it? And then how does it change as you're describing it? And what people notice is the more they describe it and feel it, the more it shrinks. And sometimes that's enough then to process the anxiety. But if not, we go to the third step, which is now introducing the mindful breathing. Close your eyes, breathe in and out through your nose. On the inhale, you feel the anxiety increase. On the exhale, you feel it relax. And just open up completely to the sensation as you breathe in, as if you're drinking it in. And what happens within a couple minutes is that feeling just fades away into nothing, and the person is peaceful. And then they open up their eyes naturally, and I know that they're good. So that is the most powerful way of processing negative emotion that I'm aware of.
Yeah, no, that sounds amazing. Even you explaining, I'm like, wow, okay, this is nice. So do you then, after, let's say, going through that process, do you then like encourage your clients or even just encourage like discussing, okay, let's talk about why you felt that way or how that even came about. Let's discuss your fears. Because I think, let's say in the heat of the moment, let's say husband and wife are discussing or talking about something, and then in the heat of the moment they get stress or anxiety or something like that, that sensation that you're saying is felt, they can take those steps to kind of calm down. But then how do you go about like the aftermath of it?
Aristotle says emotions are those things which, when changed, change judgments. So,
Mm,
as you're implying, when people are feeling a strong emotion, such as anxiety, it's altering their judgment,
mm.
making it difficult to accurately assess the goodness or badness or truth or falsehood of a particular decision or action. So before they're even capable of reflecting on the issue, they need to be able to process their anxiety. And then once they do process it, so what we'll do is we'll go back to the trigger over and over and over again and walk through the same mindful process. And as they do so, the trigger no longer remains a trigger. And then once that anxiety floats away, what I can visibly see the activation of their nervous system change from fight or flight mode to rest and recuperate, then they're able to have a much more objective, clear, calm way of looking at the encounter. So one way I like to do this is you can call it the empty chair technique. For instance, you have the client just describe the experience, or even just say what they would like to say, respond to the person if it was like an interpersonal conflict. And as they do it over and over and over, the script starts to change as the anxiety diminishes and their rational judgment increases. And then they end up having a beautiful synthesis of what they would actually like to say. And they realize, you know what, I was I was not being fair into this situation. I was reading too much into it. I was overinterpreting it. And actually that person probably didn't mean what I thought they meant. And then they can actually address it in real life.
That's a strong point too. Yeah, I think, yeah, realizing your judgment might be inhibited because of that reaction. I think we see the movie style signs of what anxiety looks like clamming hands or, shaking or things like that. Do you have any other signs or moments uh, that couples can kind of keep an eye on so that they have better grace for their spouse if they start to exhibit those signs?
Within cognitive behavioral therapy, which is the most research supported form of therapy, we think of the CBT triad, which is thoughts, emotions, actions. So, with regards to thoughts, these are words in one's head or pictures in one's head. So some symptoms related to anxiety are mind going blank, or people could come it's on the opposite end, very verbose, very restless, nervous talking. In terms of emotions, which are physical experience in the body, people could experience getting a headache, feeling their muscles tighten, particularly in the shoulder or neck, feeling warmth in the chest, feeling their heart beating faster, rapid breathing. In extreme levels, they can feel like a hot flush or cold flush, or feel like they're going to faint. They can feel an upset stomach. But sometimes people have a freeze response in extreme situations of fear and start crying uncontrollably. And then in terms of actions, this is where couples can pay attention because it's going to manifest differently. But maybe the two most common actions, one is like anything related to avoidance, avoiding a person or avoiding a place or a situation or a topic because the finances are anxiety provoking and the spouse may just avoid bringing up finances, but that's not going to be a healthy coping strategy. On the other flip side of that, there could be kind of over control type strategies of criticizing the other person or trying to over manage them, or it could lead to procrastinating or distracting oneself or seeking compensations, binging on unhealthy healthy things. So those are the different ways that anxiety manifests itself.
Great. And do you have any, I'm just trying to think of some ways that I guess couples can help each other, like let's say in the midst of conflict, because I think anxieties can arise often in conflict. Are there any suggestions that, you mentioned shutting down, you mentioned losing the emotional things that happen. How can like a spouse help their other spouse walk through that? You mentioned the process, and I'm sure that you have to probably learn how to do that. But if there is a way that like the couple could pause or figure out how to address this anxiety in the moment, or even just take a pause or break, what would you suggest in that situation of conflict?
Help the other spouse defuse. This is done primarily at first through understanding and encouraging. So even just vocalizing what the person is experiencing, that brings them back to the present moment and helps them feel understood. With the spouses, there's always going to be a fear of the bond being weakened. So expressing in words that's not the case by saying express words of love or affirmation, encouragement, how important expressing how important the relationship is, naming the fear, and just also just in demeanor, remaining calm. Hopefully, both spouses aren't triggered at the same time. Usually, it's just one, and so the other their job is to help the other one diffuse. So one danger with the husband is going to be to try to logic his way out of it, which the wife is going to most likely experience as being like minimizing of her suffering or misunderstanding her experience. So typically when a woman's anxious, it's enough just to say what she's experienced for the husband, just to articulate what she's experiencing and why she's concerned. And then that'll help the woman feel understood or just hear. Sometimes actually the first step, just listening. That may just be enough by itself even. So not trying to jump into the problem solving right away. That's probably the biggest danger.
Mhm. Um, that's great. So, how have you seen technology influence couples or have you seen it influence couples and the anxiety that they experience, whether using technology like the phones, social media, computers, all that stuff? Have you seen that affect the anxieties in couples face with each other, um, or just maybe just even family life in general?
So technology is like a third person in the relationship. C.S. Lewis said that in the future, people will live such artificial lives that when they get married to someone, they'll actually associate more with a cleverly fashioned image of their spouse, like almost like a transhumanist robot. And the technology can serve that role. What do I mean by that? And there's so many factors here. So the most important factor, I think, would be the pervasive pornography addiction that we experience in our society. Of course, men are more likely to be addicted, but there's still a significant proportion of women who are addicted to pornography. So that's the most destructive thing that can happen to a bond, because the person is bonding to someone else or something else, and to many, many different people. And it's mediated by the screen. That's the association with the brain and the screen use is so strong that they're going to feel that even when they're using the screen for a less harmful purpose. So yeah, I mean, that is a massive issue that needs to be addressed directly. So on the other hand, women are more likely to be addicted to social media, and this can be, again, another person in the relationship where they might be at dinner together and the woman is on her phone or just in the living room. And there's a sense of like, well, you're present, but you're not present. It's like I'm not even here. And then people can get very defensive about that. Usually, I think most people who have a smartphone are addicted to their smartphones. And one feature of addiction is there's an absence of insight. So people don't realize they're addicted and they're not willing to recognize the signs or hear that from other people. So it becomes very difficult to address. And then you have on lower level, like lower than addiction, just the perennial distractions. So how can we really be present to our spouses if we're always distracted? If we can't focus, we always have noise in our head, thinking about the next notification, constantly checking notifications. That attention it's a skill, it's an ability. It's not something that we can just turn on instantly whenever we want to. It's something that we have to practice over time to be able to be attentive. So if we see the beauty of the bond of just being present with the other person, being together in unity, even when no words are exchanged, maybe like especially when no words are exchanged, with that present, centered eye contact, or not, even just like being in the same room, one person's reading a book, the other person is sewing. There's a bond that's being strengthened there, and it's not the same when this third person is involved with the technology. So I would encourage people to see their relationships as the highest good. Ultimately, the relationship with God, but secondarily, the relationship with their spouse, and to practice contemplative forms of leisure and entertainment, which contribute to deep relationships. And it's very hard to be aware of how damaging the effects of technology are because they're so pervasive in our culture. Of course, Aristotle says virtue lies in the mean between two extremes, the excess and the defect. So in our case, the excess of the technology is so excessive that it's completely obfuscated where the mean lies. So the true mean is going to look to some people as if you're living like an Amish person. So and my point here is that we can't use the cultural norm as the standard to guide where the true good is.
It's a powerful statement to say to the third person because it's so true. You sit like you just gave the example of reading a book and someone sewing. But if you do that same example, instead of it's a book, it's a cell phone, you automatically feel that kind of, yeah, that tension that's there. Yeah, and I think because of that tension, that does build up stress, whether it's in the husband with the wife who's addicted to social media, or it's the wife who's fearful of her husband being addicted to porn. So those are all that builds up on that anxiety and that stress. Do you have, just kind of to round out our conversation, do you have any suggestions for couples who are looking to free themselves from certain aspects, let's say of technology or of just even habits that cause, a more anxious mentality? Do you have any suggestions for couples to kind of free themselves from those habits?
You can look at two approaches. One is the gradual approach, and the other is flooding, just going all out. Um, when it comes to technology, I'm kind of a fan of the flooding approach, just go all out, just scorched earth. So going for a dopamine detox, screen detox, going 7 days, 14 days with a significant reduction in screen use. I published one of these detox options on my Substack, Dr. Johann D'Souza. So that's one route. And the beauty of that is people can notice a big change. And the harder it is to do it, the more benefit they will experience because it's like withdrawal. Like the greater the withdrawal, then that just means that the greater the physiological dependence was, and hence the greater the healing impact is going to be. But I understand that not everyone is willing or able to do this. So you can do the gradual approach of just thinking, just reflecting, which apps can I delete on my phone? Which notifications can I reduce? Jonathan Haidt recommends having no more than 5 apps that give you notifications. Which times of my day can I protect as non-negotiable that I'm not going to have access to my phone at all? For example, meal times, coming home after work, that sort of thing. Putting phone on grayscale. I personally am a big advocate of the flipped model of phone use, meaning the default is not to have the phone on me, and I go to it as a tool to check it when I have planned to do so, and outside of that times I don't. Um, there's this there's this in most cases illusion that we need to be constantly on. So you talk about anxiety, especially women experience this, I think, with their children or with their spouses, that I need to be aware in case there's a school shooter, which is extremely unlikely. And these are like real arguments I've heard. It's by far less likely than getting struck by lightning. I actually did around the statistics not too long ago. These are very unlikely incidents. But with this culture of safetyism, this like hyper concern of physical dangers and lack of concern of the true dangers, which are predominantly digital. Um, so running little experiments that, okay, what happens if I don't check my phone for 2 hours? Which of my kids gets kidnapped because I didn't check my phone for 2 hours? So, which again is, it's like they'd have to live till they're 700,000 years old to get kidnapped. Statistically, that's the likelihood of getting kidnapped. So that's one approach. I think you had a second part of the question, but in my rant, I
Yeah,
forgot it.
yeah, no, that's great. Just suggestions for, yeah, couples on how to, either with technology or with other things, to mitigate the stress and anxiety, to alleviate it or to find solutions to kind of avoid it.
So I've talked about the direct approaches to anxiety, with mindfulness being the one I described at length. There are others, but it's also interesting to look at the indirect approaches. So these are things that lead to a heightening of anxiety indirectly. For example, lack of sleep, or poor diet, or lack of exercise, or not having anything meaningful to do, being bored. So that can happen if you have moms that stay at home and don't have a lot to do. And it seems nice on the one hand, but actually it leads to feeling unfulfilled, and then it just can lead to just sort of like ruminating and anxiety. And on the flip side of that, on the other extreme, there's this danger of activism, of people just being involved in way too many things. I think this is a massive tool of the devil, getting kids in these travel sports, um, or just the number of extracurriculars, the amount of driving that's happening,
Mhm.
the number of sports that kids are involved in, distance to work, the distance to school, and the social isolation that stay-at-home moms often feel because of the lack of social support in this country, because our parents aren't in down the street, and grandmother's not down the street. You don't know if you can trust your neighbor. In fact, you think you probably can't, because they have a rainbow flag on their front yard in June. So looking at ways to address these indirect triggers to anxiety.
Yeah, that's great. Well, thank you so much for sharing your expertise. We'd love to hear about how our subscribers and followers can find more about what you do at Values First Therapy. And then you mentioned your Substack, so we'll include that also in the show notes.
My website is valuesfirsttherapy.com. Uh, And however, I am, one thing I'm most excited about is speaking on, particularly save your children from digital destruction. So I'm going on a speaking tour this spring. So if people are interested in having me present for one of the talks, then please contact me. Perhaps you can include the contact information. And I'm in the middle of releasing a YouTube series on saving children from digital destruction, to provide free resources for that.
Perfect. And yeah, we'd probably love to have you back on the show to discuss that too, because that's a huge, we just touched a little bit about technology in this conversation, but I'm sure there's way more to talk about. So we'd love to have you back on the show too. If you,
Thanks, Margaret.
thanks so much for joining us. And we look forward to speaking with you again soon. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Fairest Love podcast. In 2026, we continue to share the devotion to Mary, Mother of Fairest Love. If you like what you heard on today's show, please visit our website at fairestlovefamilyproject.org, where you can find additional podcasts and other resources for families. Be sure to also check us out on social media at Fairest Love Project. Thank you for listening, and we'll catch you on an episode soon.